This, Yizkor 5784, is the eulogy of the year. Our tradition encourages, almost forces us to remember and reflect on past challenges, lost loved ones, and to sit with our own grief. Today is not only Yizkor for October 7th victims. Today is Yizkor for the loves of 5784. Jamie Anderson wrote, "Grief, I've learned, is really just love. It's all the love you want to give but cannot." This has been a profound year full of grief and loss, underscored by love and connection. We are all grieving. Some of us are here having lost grandparents, parents, siblings, children. And others of us are grieving family and friends who died in war, or grieving an earlier naive sense of safety on school campuses or in workplaces, or our failing faith in humanity, or a weakening hope in the future. But we are grieving together. We are immersed in love, a love that we want to give but cannot. A comfort that you are giving to those beside you, even if you do not know that you are doing it. Where does love go when someone dies? It transforms into other emotions and a sense of grief that words struggle to replace. Yizkor and memorials and grieving in general will continue to be complicated and feel insufficient until every hostage is home, safe and hugging their loved ones, and until every body is buried. As I asked on Rosh Hashanah, how do we begin to leave a year that we will not be leaving for a long time, and so desperately need to enter the next year? A recognition of love turned to grief, of love that was once given in all of the mundane, practical, worldly ways, and is now bottled up inside our souls, our hearts, our minds, and shared through our words of eulogy and story. From a young age, Judaism teaches us that grief is profound love and devotion. Even when our parents do not expect that we are paying attention, by osmosis we come to understand that this is what community does. We watch loved ones stand up for Kaddish. We sit in homes where we run around eating cookies while adults share tears and hugs in a room praying the afternoon or evening service that we have never heard before. We experience the plethora of deli delivered when someone passes away before we can understand why Jews always assume that sadness means sandwiches. Judaism puts into place experiences that prepare us for grief before we have intimately experienced it, and mourning before we need to know how to do it. Shiva is an experience that is known and practiced by people of all connections to their Judaism as religion and or culture. It is a ritual that encapsulates support, love, community, and the metaphorical hug that we might not even know we need. A home filled with warmth, often chatter, and of course food. And Shiva is a self-serving experience to attend so that when it comes time for your family to need it, you know you will have community with you too. Shiva is defined in its name. On a basic level, we sit for 7 days and are cared for by community and family and friends. We do not plan for Shiva as a feeling or a process. Sure, we prepare to participate in Shiva, but we cannot possibly know how Shiva will make us feel, or what stories we might tell or might hear, or what bechi, what cries we might spontaneously share. We don't plan for how Shiva will engage us in deeper mourning and communal appreciation. Shiva comes, and we know to surrender to the solace, at least eventually. We have religious and spiritual insurance in our grieving rituals. We practice them and engage in them before we need them. And of course, we even hope unrealistically that we will never need them. Even those who are proficient in grieving rituals are stunned and disoriented and become novice when tragic or sudden grief hits. As Rachel Goldberg Poland said in her poignant eulogy for her son Hirsch, one of our personifications of hope for the past year, I have had a lot of time during the past 332 days to think about my sweet boy. I will love you and I will miss you every single day for the rest of my life. But you are right here. I know you are right here. I just have to teach myself to feel you in a new way. Not ready and yet prepared. Not prepared and yet learning to show the love she still has but cannot give in the same form of tucking her boy in at night, of calling him to share the news of his favorite soccer team, or of hugging him to let him know he is safe. Though Judaism sets us up to understand grief and mourning before we have to experience it, how do we handle grief after we have experienced it? How do we mourn in moments when we are not ready to accept the loss? How do we grieve when the loss is too painful to confront? How do we grieve when it is for hundreds and thousands of people who we will never know, and for whom we are not, quote, traditional mourners, but who share holy space and connection with us, and whom we grieve? We have heard too many eulogies this year for families, friends, role models, and of course, faces and names who we wished would be symbols of hope coming home. Since last Yom Kippur, since October 7th, and for you and your loved ones, this eulogy, Yizkor, is a way of illustrating life streaked with trauma, love we are desperately unable to share. In Judaism, there are two forms of eulogizing: a hesped, a eulogy in written or spoken praise for the worthy qualities and achievements of the deceased, and bechi, a lament to arouse the emotions and a sense of grief and loss in the listeners. We learn of these two pieces of eulogizing from Genesis 23:2. V'tamot Sarah beKiryat Arba hi, Chevron be'eretz Canaan. Sarah died in Kiryat Arba, which is now Chevron, in the land of Canaan. Vayavo Avraham lispod leSarah ve'livkota. And Abraham came to eulogize his wife Sarah and to bewail her. Rabbi Jason Weiner says, Jewish law emphasizes that eulogies should be both truthful and praiseworthy. One should not lie about the qualities of the deceased or make obvious exaggerations, but it is proper to enhance their positive attributes. Though we do not know what Avraham said, we assume that he shared the stories of their love, their shared losses, and Sarah's courage and wisdom, using both words and emotion to hold moments where words are insufficient. As we have heard so many times this year, ein milim, there are sometimes no words, and so wailing, singing, silence will have to do. David Bialy, Zichrono Livracha, a UCLA professor who lost his battle with prostate cancer in July, testified to his own life in a kind of penultimate chapter just before he died in a lecture. In the end, we have only words, the doctor's words, my words, your words about me. I have made my livelihood from words. I first made love with words in the form of letters. I made a living with words, written and spoken. A worldless world awaits, where there is no news for me at all. We should overstate the positive attributes of those who have died, according to our Shulchan Aruch, the Code of Law. As Rabbi Weiner continues, people often conceal many of their qualities, so even those eulogizing the individual may be unaware of them. I often remark to families that being the rabbi at a funeral makes me even sadder for not knowing the person in life. They seem interesting and powerful and funny and loving and complicated, and clearly a foundational piece of the family who is remembering them through their words. A eulogy should inspire those listening to better their lives and consider their own legacies. A eulogy should help bring color to what has now turned black and white. A black wall with white description welcomes you into a room of vibrant voices singing and uplifting emotional music. Vibrant pink and purple tapestries with mandala-shaped design atop. Innocent, carefree lights and sounds of music that would make anyone want to dance and make any mood turn to joy and calm. Sand below your feet and a mist of humid fog welcomes you into the space. This is an exhibit of art as life, dancing as language, and grief as our message. It is an exhibit of love, love before and during grief. This Nova exhibit is an illustrated eulogy for October 7th. Specifically focused on those at the festival who were murdered and others who survived, but a eulogy for what the day was and continues to be in our memory. A year ago, it was a day of dancing and joy, Zman Simchatenu, finishing Sukkot with Simchat Torah, with kite rituals from Kfar Aza into Gaza, showing signs of peacemaking and hopeful lives with neighbors, a day of celebration with families filling homes for the Chag and crowding Shabbat and holiday tables together, a day of communal beginnings, a new Torah, end of a season bringing a new year and new life, a day of pure light, joy, love, and dancing that was cut short and brutally stolen. One of the founders of the festival said, "Something was born at Nova, as if, like God, light was brought from darkness, a festival built on values and love and connecting souls and bodies to the earth through their hearts." Part of the most powerful moment of that morning at Nova is that the dancing begins in the dark. Participants did not know who they were dancing next to or what they looked like or where they were from or why they were there. And then the music begins to pick up, following the rhythm of the sunrise, and all of a sudden, you are now dancing while looking into someone's eyes. One of the survivors shared, "It is something you cannot explain. Now seeing souls you have never seen." The constant phrase, "It's like we knew this would be the last dance," echoes throughout so many stories in the exhibit. Dancing as if no one can see you, and when they can, dancing with others to bring life and ecstasy into a shared moment. Moving through the exhibit, this eulogy, the objects transcend words, reviving the spirit of that terrible, powerful day. Someone asked Barry Weiss recently how she was going to commemorate October 7th, and she said, "How do you offer a eulogy when the war is not yet over? And 101 hostages, those still alive, and the bodies of those murdered are not yet home. How do you remember a catastrophe when it is still unfolding? How do you look at something with a sense of distance when it has revealed so much, so close to home?" I think the answer to many of these powerful and relatable questions is live. The location in our Torah where we learn to eulogize is Chayei Sarah, a parsha named for Sarah's life, and we begin by hearing of her death. This is what Yizkor is all about, taking moments to think of life lost by sitting amongst those living with whom you also love, holding your grandchild's hand while remembering your parent, and imagining the ways they would have loved your child's creation. Hugging a partner and feeling their heartbeat, to hold onto love that grows and shares so much of you through them and into the world. Listening to music with tears streaming down your face, feeling a deep sense of connection to memories and stories of how that music first came to affect you. Barry is 100% correct that we must question our readiness to sum up the past year in an effective and meaningful way. We cannot yet write a complete eulogy for October 7th. But this year, we remember the events, the loss, the individual stories of lives changed and destroyed on that day. And why? Because their story is told by all of us, lives that were forever altered on that day. Eulogizing is an art. It's a yes and. We are lifting up multiple truths. We learn to turn our attention to something positive and impactful, and we also acknowledge that loss is deeply sad and messy and painful and complicated, and at times horrific. The Nova exhibit is both beautiful and horrific, colorful and bleak. It's not about taking the sad and heavy and turning our attention to something positive and impactful. It's a container for both, a beautiful vessel holding grief as its contents. When we eulogize in grief, we are bringing light to a world of living legacy for our loved ones, for their legacy, making their memories a blessing. As Ilan, one festival goer, said to his partner before he was murdered, "If I die, scatter color, scatter glitter, and dance." Part of the magic of this exhibit is that the curators are teaching us about a horrific day made that much more shocking and impactful by the brilliant aesthetics, the colors, the music, the funky clothing, the warm air, the striking made-up faces, and the intricate tapestries, all draped over death and close calls and videos of harrowing experiences. In grief, we eulogize. We share stories. We try to fill voids with memories and smells and intentional things to wear or display or hold. This exhibit is the perfect eulogy, beautiful, life-giving, and sharing grief through celebration of life, where people of all ages and religions and cultures, proximities to that day, walk around in shock, in awe, and in love, feeling love for faces they will never meet, but who they hold on to because of the life they are sharing. At the end of Torah, God says to Moshe, "This is the land I swore to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. You have seen it with your own eyes, but you shall not cross." Moses then dies. He was buried, eulogized, and then emulated in action and in practice by his people and his successor. Sforno suggests that during the days of weeping, there was neither wisdom nor counsel. And the Or HaChaim continues this by sharing that the muted reaction to Moshe's death was because the Shekhinah immediately settled on Joshua. God is doing these mitzvot for Moshe in his death, not family, not community. God buries Moshe and then eulogizes him in our Torah. Now, if Moshe helped God inscribe the Torah, Moshe wrote his own eulogy, and it's short. U'Moshe ben 120 shana b'moto lo kohata eino velo nas lechoha. Moshe was 120 years old when he died. His eyes were undimmed and his vigor unabated. The Israelites cried for Moshe for 30 days and then they stopped. However, here is what expresses the life and the love of Moshe. V'Yehoshua ben Nun maleh ruach chochma ki samach Moshe et yadav alav. Yehoshua ben Nun was filled with the spirit of wisdom because Moshe had laid his hands upon him. V'yishme'u elav b'nei Yisrael v'yasu ka'asher siva Adonai et Moshe. And the Israelites listened to him, and they did as God had commanded Moshe. So the people took comfort in knowing that God was now with this leader, but in the spirit and in the love of their leader. And so it goes in our story, our history since Moshe is Moshe's eulogy, his legacy. Though these few lines of Torah might be the tangible eulogy that we learn from this ending of our Torah, that it is our story that is Moshe's eulogy. We are to live as Moshe lived, learn from mistakes, lead through collaboration and listening, be humble, be an advocate for the people in our midst, and always know from whence we came. If we wait for grief to start embracing our people and the world as a whole with a sense of love, it will be too late. Love comes first, before, during, and after grief, unapologetic and eager to be shared with and to the ones who deserve to know how much they are appreciated. If anything, 5784 has taught us that like our people in the moment of Moshe's death, we cannot wait for grief to bring us close to one another. We must remember that although we have learned to grieve and our faith has built a beautiful scaffolding within which to do so, we are a people that prioritizes living. Yizkor is a reminder that the majority of our days are to be filled with presence, awareness of life lived and growing into our futures. And when necessary, death and mourning will make time pause, ripping our hearts open with kriya, never to be whole in the same way again, but in a new way, a new whole, minus what was lost, making room for what will be found. Noam ben David sets up a booth on the streets of Israel with a table draped in signs she's made, memorabilia they shared, and 2 chairs to welcome guests into her home of grief. The posters read, "My boyfriend was murdered on October 7th. Let me tell you about him." People sit down and hear stories of who he was. "We liked to surf and watch the sunset and play frisbee. He loved to make people happy and do things for people. Something about him made you forget everything bad in life." She lets people sit down and ask questions, but she begins with how his death changed her outlook on life. "I appreciate life more. I live not only for myself, but for David also." She tells them stories about him, what he loved, how he lived, and they are changed by hearing his story. She is eulogizing David every day by sharing his light and allowing it to bring color amidst the darkness to make their lives and her own purposeful. Judaism does not suggest that we wait for moments of grief, loss, or sadness to know what it means to share memory and stories. Masua Sagiv from the Shalom Hartman Institute taught Yosef Chaim Yerushalmi's book Zachor, which emphasizes that memory is not history. Memory, Yerushalmi teaches, is not an accurate telling of what happened in the past. Sagiv goes on to share it does not treat the past as remote, as something that happened long ago in a different place or to a different people. Rather, Jewish memory is alive in our present. It is selective and constructed by us as active participants. Only for Jews, Yerushalmi says, is the commandment to remember a religious commandment, a mitzvah for the entire people. In the concluding video you see as you leave the Nova exhibit, one of the survivors, or I have heard them called warriors, shares, "We will dance again despite the scars. That is how we will be whole again." Our memory will bring us to the dance floor, covered in bandages and scars. However, as these beautiful souls are teaching us and their friends are showing us in life, we must live now and come together now in community. We cannot wait for the next catastrophe. We often think about the eulogy as the way of ending a chapter. In fact, though, it begins another one. The eulogy, the stories we tell at Shiva and Shloshim, become a narrative, sometimes a new narrative, for how we remember someone and how we are inspired by the stories we share to keep living in their honor. We may still be grieving. We probably always will be. Yet, we will be living more purposefully, remembering more intentionally through the eulogies we hear and write. So 5785, your eulogy is partially written by past years and punctuated by a particularly challenging chapter this year. Here's to turning the page on this year, to move to the next page in our incomplete eulogy. As hard as it may be, moving forward with different strengths, wisdom, and courageous moments. Love harder, live deeper. Let us do all the good we can this year with whatever time we have and with whatever experiences we endure. Let us color the black and white. Let us find reasons to hug that are not partnered with wiping away tears. Let us dance again because we are feeling grateful for life and full of joy. We are ready for tomorrow because we are still writing this eulogy, inspiring us to live fully and feel love in the grief of today. Gamar Chatima Tova.